Okay, we're recording now.
Oh,
So,
fantastic.
okay, so this is a discussion response, whatever you want to call it, video to Noah, aka Veritas48, video, which is a response to Dr. William Lane Craig's not sermon, but lecture on the absurdity of life without God. So, we're going to be talking about that. So,
Okay, so I guess the first thing we'll need to talk about is Dr. Craig's Absurdity of Life Without God, because I will assume that not everyone who watches this video has seen it or really remembers Dr. Craig's lecture. So what does he go through, like during the Absurdity of Life Without God? You're as familiar with Dr. Craig as I am, at least.
yeah, at first he begins, by talking. I always remember the first line he gives is "Man is the cosmic orphan." That always sticks out in my head. But he just, in a nutshell,
Man is like sort of like those Charles Dickens characters, where it's like they're abused, beat the Dickens out of them. That's all. Oh yeah. All right. What did you
that
say?
is horrible.
I know that's terrible, which is why I love it.
It's horrible, Drew.
And that's man under.
Yeah,
this
but he's just talking about how, in a nutshell, he's just trying to say that life is ultimately meaningless without God because we're just accidents, and we're all the whole human race is going to perish eventually in the heat death of the universe, and and if there is no immortality or afterlife, nothing we do really seems to matter, and so it creates this sort of big, it's just to show that the existence of God matters, because otherwise there's this big, how I put this, existential burden. Would that be a good way to call it here? Like, I mean, that's existentialism, isn't it? Basically, this life is meaningless.
Oh, existentialism. Yeah, it's about. I know it's described as existence precedes essence. That things don't have essential properties. There isn't anything essential as to what humanity is, but instead there's just things that exist. We just begin with sort of our experience and just discuss it from there.
Mm-hmm.
I hope people can hear me now. It was harder beforehand, so I'll try to move forward slightly.
I think if you're talking and the green thing doesn't go up at all, you probably should talk a little bit louder. But it seems to be responding. So
I'm trying to be a little closer.
I guess it could. I guess to get more specific, then we'd have to reply directly to what Noah was saying here.
Yeah, and here's what we have. We've got I created 3 pages of notes, even though I'm I don't know why. It's like
no, it's good that you did.
I wasn't intending to respond. It's just,
it helps jog my memory here.
Okay. Well,
so
good.
But I remember. Okay, so the first thing Noah says is he complains that Dr. Craig doesn't properly define the terms absurdity and I guess meaning is the first complaint here. And so I suppose traditionally, though, when we say absurd, what do we mean? We mean like just, I guess absurd and meaningless are the same thing, like pointless, has no point, or...
Yeah, life itself doesn't have some sort of objective point.
Yeah, okay. Let's see here. You also wrote in your notes here, distinction between personal...
Like when we talk about, let's say, highways, or just things that we have, this computer, people will... Oh, sorry. When we talk about all these normal things that we enjoy, like things that we manufacture. Let's say a highway. It's there for a purpose. The highway is there so that we can move cars and trucks at a very high speed, so that we can have sort of a greater range of commutes and also traveling across the country. And secondarily, it was used as an emergency airfield as well. That's just another sort of fun fact. They were originally supposed to be Cold War airfields. Right. So those are the purposes of it. But under this sort of absurdist view, once we have this designer of the universe taken out of the equation, now the universe just sort of is. There's no purpose. There's no reason. Even though humanity, one of the big questions for us is, why are we here? For what purpose does humanity exist on this planet? We seem to have pretty strong intuitions that we have some sort of meaning and purpose in a general sense. And once humanity started dumping God, then this whole series of nihilist philosophy comes into it.
Like Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yes.
Noah, I know, is a big fan of Nietzsche.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, I'm sure he's familiar with him. He's read a few of his works.
Yeah, a few of them. I know another point you got here in your notes, which I recall, is it says no distinction between personal significance and ultimate significance, which, so I recall Noah was bringing up the point about how, which I think Shelley Kagan, because he mentions Dr. Craig's student Shelley Kagan, where he's talking about just because there's no ultimate cosmic significance, as they put it, they complain that it's wrong to say, therefore there's no significance. They think that's a mistake. Noah thinks that's a mistake, I suppose. And
Yeah, and he's quite adamant about it too. He really pounds his fist into the table at that point in the discussion.
yeah, basically I think Noah, what he's saying is that, well, yeah, fine, there may not be any ultimate significance, but like, my life, I guess, matters to me. I hope I'm not misrepresenting him when I say that. That seems to be what he's saying. Like he's saying life can still be meaningful for the individual, I believe is what he's saying here, even though, we're ultimately going to die eventually. And I think, and then to help support this, he gives the analogy of a book, saying that just because a book is about to end, just because books have endings to them, but that doesn't mean that once we finish, we think, oh, that was meaningless, that was stupid here.
I think that's a different subject.
A different subject.
I mean, it is part of his video, but there's a difference between saying life has no meaning without God versus life has no meaning without immortality.
Yeah, okay.
There's a difference there.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's another thing we'll have to discuss. Why immortality factors, why it is a factor regarding how
Yeah.
life, whether life is absurd or not.
And as I recall, even Dr. Craig says, like, immortality, it's one of those necessary, but not alone sufficient for there to be meaning. Because then Dr. Craig gives the example of somebody who, like an astronaut who's got two vials. One is poison, one is an elixir that'll make him immortal. Like, he's stranded out in space, and he accidentally drinks the elixir that makes him immortal. And so, but then he's just like, oh my God, no, that means I'm going to live forever out in this, by myself in the middle of space. And that's terrible. So, just shows that immortality alone isn't enough to give meaning to life. I hope we're not jumping around too much here. What was the other part he talked about here? Cosmic significance is...
Yeah, basically, I think he was trying to say that value is subjective. So, I mean, I'm trying to think of it, what order to sort of discuss. Let's discuss our feelings or whatever, whatever.
Well, here's the
discussion. This is
here's my thing.
Video.
Here's my thing here, though. It's hard for me to make sense of this idea that that there is meaning and value in life without God. I mean, here's an example here. I hope I have no idea if Noah has seen Noah. I have no idea if you've seen Babylon 5 or not. If you haven't, sorry, I'll try my best to explain. Okay, there's a show called Babylon 5. It's a sci-fi show, and near the end of the fourth season, this is after they've had the whole finale where they've accomplished their big goal about ridding Earth from the evil President Clark and everything, and then the next episode, what it does, like the episode before that ends with them saying, do you think anybody will remember this in 1,000,000 years? And they're going, yeah, probably not. And then what the next episode does is it starts going ahead into the future. Like it goes 500 years into the future, 1,000 years, million, 10 million years. And I always remember feeling a little depressed at the end of that episode here because, I mean, the episode ends, by the way, with the sun going supernova and the Earth blowing up, and like the human race becomes... Oh boy, there's no way to describe this without explaining the show here, but they basically save all their information to a spaceship and they fly away, the whole human race flies away from Earth, and Earth blows up here. And the idea is that they're going to live on because they've become these higher beings now, or something like that. And but I still remember feeling kind of depressed because I thought, but then what's going to happen after that? Then the universe is going to go, if you fast forward even more, it's going to go supernova. And just watching that episode for me, I just thought, well, gee, it kind of means nothing in the whole 5 seasons of the show really mattered. It's just a blip on the radar of the universe here. And my reaction when they go back to the 5th season is I just didn't think about that. Because I just kind of realized, wow, everything was kind of pointless here because it didn't really matter at the end. And I really hope I'm making sense here. If if you've seen Babylon 5, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't and you don't follow me, I apologize. But I just remember after that episode was over and the 5th season starts up again, where it goes back to the present time and then they continue on with the show. I just remember thinking, wow, that's depressing. I just didn't think about that. Like, I mean, if I came to believe that God didn't exist and everything, not sure I'd go into despair, but I probably would just not think about it. I probably would just use all these other things in life, like music, movies, just to distract me from that. Because it does seem kind of pointless here. Like, it doesn't seem to matter at the end here. Now, and I know Noah later gives the example of saying, well, what was he like? He's saying, well, it matters to me, and then what was he saying with? He said he gives the example of says his wife. What if my wife dies of cancer? What if I knew my wife was going to die of cancer 20 years down the road? Does that therefore mean that the relationship isn't meaningful for me now? Well, or maybe I'm jumping ahead to a different point here.
Yeah, there's a bunch of points. Maybe we shouldn't have. It's like, why do they bring all these like notes here? And we're just like going through. Oh, okay. I mean,
well, I know Noah's expecting some kind of response here or something.
Yeah, well, if that's the case, then we'll just fold and concede we don't have an adequate response. So if you win, all right. Now that we're done with that, can we actually just get to like just discussing the video?
Discussing the video.
Yeah,
fine.
discussing the video and its actual, and trying to like formulate some sort of adequate response that covers every point, which I'm not really interested in doing.
Okay, well, sorry.
Unless you
sorry,
want,
Noah,
unless you want to create, unless Cody over here wants to on his own create some separate thing where he like logic chops the hell out of like the video, like goes every point. All right, point 1, point A.
Well,
there's a fallacy of such and such.
Well, I know. I mean, I've been thinking. I mean, I think to a large extent, Noah points out later on how it seems to depend on people's psychological states, because you know. Because there's a point where he plays the clip from Craig's debate with Kagan where Craig says, well, I just find the idea that, it's so depressing and everything. It just puts a question mark on everything we do. And then Kagan says, well, it doesn't bother me. And then Craig's just like, yeah. And I mean, I guess to a large, I don't know. I guess we got to ask, is the argument about, I guess if you're saying, should the argument logically lead you to despair here, I guess that point I probably would have to concede that no, there's no logical argument that says if God does not exist, you must, to be consistent, despair.
Yeah, there's not really, it doesn't seem like you must really do anything. Like
yeah, I guess on that point.
It doesn't seem consistent, this kind of objective obligation.
Mm-hmm.
Coexisting with this kind of godless just universe.
I mean, that I guess I could agree with Noah on here. That, I mean, yeah, fine. I guess you could still, like, say, okay, yeah, God doesn't exist. There is no ultimate meaning, though. But I'm going to give meaning to my life or whatever. And, I can still value things like my friends or family or things like that. But I don't know. I mean, but it doesn't seem to answer the charge that there's still no ultimate meaning here. Like,
well, they pretty much agree though that there is no ultimate meaning.
Okay.
The problem I have with Shelley Kagan is I found it when he said that he was a compatibilist, like that he believed that determinism and free will were compatible with each other. It seems more like he holds to this view of naturalism, but he also holds to these other things that we find intuitive, like that we have free will,
mm-hmm.
and that we have meaning, and that these other things, and just takes both pretty much on faith. He just says, yeah, I just take on faith that both are true, even though value and freedom and meaning and the like don't follow from naturalism. It's like when you start with naturalism, you're not going to sort of come up with this meaning. But he seems to have these intuitions of that things are meaningful. He says, yeah, they're true. I don't think that's consistent with. I've made videos on why there are logical incompatibilities between determinism and free will, and also I'd say the same thing with meaning as well. Meaning, I guess, on his view, is going like to the atheists or to anyone. Like
right.
When we have meaning, or in those words, significance.
Right.
It's one of three things. It's either objective, it's subjective, or it's reducible. And when I say reducible, I mean like reducible to some physical state of affairs.
Just so why don't we define objective and subjective real quickly here?
So
there's no confusion.
Okay.
So I guess objective, if we just use the standard independent of whether we believe it or not kind of
right.
thing.
To say, for example, that Dr. Craig's his thing is like to say that what the Nazis did was objectively wrong is to say that what they did was wrong, regardless, even though the Nazis thought what they were doing was right, and even if they had won the World War, brainwashed and killed anyone who opposed them, so that all humans thought that their action was right, well, it's still wrong if it's objective. Another way to say something is objective is like the charge of an electron, right? It has a certain negative charge, and that's independent of whether there are any conscious observers around to see it or not, or to observe it. It's an objective feature of reality. Now the question is meaning objective? I don't see how on atheism one can get objective values. Like what would be the standard to ground, like what object would do that?
Yeah, where would you get objective meaning? And Noah, at least, he seems to at least say that, yeah, there is no objective meaning. I mean, here's the thing here. Like, if you just say, well, I mean, it seems that you're kind of conceding the point when you say that, well, I give my life meaning, or it matters to me kind of thing. It still seems to concede the point because you're still agreeing there's no objective meaning. So it seems to me, like I say, the main beef I think he has is Craig's answer, where the only way to consistently handle the idea of no objective meaning is to just despair, and it's like, oh, just be like, life is meaningless, it's horrible, but
Yeah, I guess you'd say, like, how we get objective meaning. Is it like, if we like give life objective meaning, like, what is it? Is it like I give it a certain amount of meaning and Cody gives it a certain amount of meaning, and we just add together all of our definitions of what things are meaningful, and that's what its meaning is objectively? I mean, that seems like, well, I mean, that could be the case. The question is, what happens if we have contradictory views on what is or is not meaningful?
Mm-hmm.
Some people do believe that life has no meaning whatsoever.
Right.
So how do their opinions factor into this? Is it just like adding zero to an equation?
Yeah.
I mean, that just seems contrary to just trying to have this sum total of human opinion, because there are contradictory human opinions.
Let's talk about this point that I thought was interesting. Noah made, where his point where he says, where he responds to Craig's point, where he says that on atheism, it ultimately doesn't make any difference whether you lived your life as a Stalin or versus a Mother Teresa lifestyle. And Noah tried to say that it's the same for Christianity, because on Christianity it doesn't make any difference, because if say you lived your life as a Stalin, where you responsible for the deaths of millions of people, and then you say you become a Christian towards the end of your life and everything, and then you're saved and you go into heaven. So according to Noah, then on that view, it doesn't seem to make a difference whether you lived as a Stalin or a saint.
Yeah, or let's say there's two people. The first, let's say, lives his life as a Stalin, but near the end of his life becomes a Christian and is saved. And the other might live his life as a Mother Teresa and then becomes a Christian at the end of his life and is saved. Is it this? And let's say both have pretty much the same state of affairs. I don't really know. I don't know all the arguments about different levels of reward and different levels of punishment. From the theology books I've read, it seems like there is at least some level of difference on how someone lives their life, on what kind of reward that they're going to receive after they die. But the question is, I guess the fact that someone lives as a Stalin before he became a Christian, does that simply not matter? I think it matters to a lot of
yeah. Like, what about the people that you killed or anything, or maybe
their families are sort of impacted by that. The people
even on a spiritual level. And if I may interject here, even if it seems to me like this is one of those tactics where they try to almost deflect the problem back onto Christianity, which is what this objection is. But even if that were true, it still doesn't answer the problem for atheism. Like, it doesn't really answer even if we conceded that, okay, fine, even if we conceded that is a problem for Christianity, it doesn't get atheism off the hook still.
Oh, it's a Tukokei fallacy, or so's your mama kind of.
Yeah, it's almost like saying, you offer this objection, the person just kind of goes, oh, well, you can't get out of this. Like, even if that was true for Christianity, it still doesn't get atheism off the hook. Like, on atheism, does it matter ultimately whether you lived as a Stalin or a saint? And I don't recall Noah really giving an answer to that in the video. So
he just gives the Tukokei argument. So that's
but no, it's a legitimate point, I think, to ask if Christianity is the same problem. But as I was just saying,
with Christianity, I mean, it's not just with yourself; it's with everyone you affect. So are there going to be long-term differences in between if you had lived your life well or if you had lived your life sinfully? And it seems like it did. Like, if you look in ancient Israel, Manasseh, the wicked king, the wickedest of all the kings of Judah, he enacted all sorts of horrible actions, and that is, according to the Books of the Kings, the reason that Israel went into exile. The whole nation of Israel had to suffer tremendously. And there was a lot of other deaths and a lot of other suffering because of King Manasseh's. Even though, according to the Chronicles, he eventually repented and may very well have been saved. There is a difference. If he had been righteous his whole life, Israel would have lived differently, would have had a different existence, and perhaps more Israelites could have been saved under.
Or they're just like, for example, there's in the long run, in terms of heaven and everything, it would seem to make a difference if I say live my life as a big evangelist going around, preaching the gospel and saving people, as opposed to living as Stalin and killing people, well, then it does seem to matter because in the former, I'm actually helping to bring people to Christ and get into heaven, and thus they can have eternal salvation. Whereas I'm not doing that if I'm living like a Stalin. So yeah, it does seem to matter on Christianity how you live your life, even if even if it doesn't ultimately make the difference for you as an individual whether you get into heaven or not.
And we're not conceding that either, because that is a controversial issue within theology.
So, yeah, okay. I think that's about all I can say about that. And then, what was the
Oh,
other
how about
thing?
Dr. Craig's arguments are emotionally laden and
Emotionally
not
laden.
purely logical? It's like, well, yeah, if you're a
To an
decent,
extent, I think he's right on
if you're a
this.
decent communicator, though, you've got to make emotional sense to your audience. Otherwise, you become like, let's say, Zeno or Parmenides. Like Zeno, like those two came up with really powerful arguments. It took a
Like
very
the Zeno's paradox.
Zeno, yeah, it took a very long time for fellow philosophers to find the holes with them. But let's say because Zeno had a bunch of arguments, you can't respond to them, right? They just dominated everyone. Are you obligated then to follow Zeno's belief system? Well, I think one reason is they didn't seem to resonate emotionally, and that's why.
And they had these counterintuitive and obviously false conclusions.
Well, yeah, it seemed to counter our intuitions and then counter our emotional beliefs. So it somewhat made his arguments unpersuasive. So you might think, in this ideal world that all arguments are going to be 100% logical with no emotional components, and all humans are totally rational. But I don't know. That's a sort of just idealized, just completely idealized world. I just don't think it's like realistic to expect someone to hold to those standards.
I think there might be two parts to this whole thing. Like I think Craig is saying, giving I think the logical part, is just when he says that without God there is no objective meaning here. And I think he might be right saying it is somewhat emotional to say, well then, it seems you must despair about, oh, life is meaningless and everything. And I think that is probably where the wiggle room is going on here.
Okay.
This second part where, well, is it logical to just despair once you come to, because even I think Noah even seems to agree that life is ultimately meaningless.
I don't know. It seems like there is a reason.
Maybe he'll correct. I'm sure. I'm gonna want to post this up. He's obviously gonna see this and comment on this and give us feedback.
I don't know. There seems like there are reasons to despair if, let's say, a bunch of work you're going to do is eventually going to be undone. For example, if we are pretty much required to put an amount of our, let's say, our earnings, our salaries into some sort of fund, let's say a mutual type fund, but we know that then at some point you're told, the mutual fund that just, as Dave Ramsey told you, is going to build you into like a $3 million or $4 million nest egg to retire from, where you can do lots of stuff at the age of 60, have 28 years of your life that are really having fun. And then someone in the middle says, oh yeah, by the way, the mutual fund was run by like the Bernie Madoff Foundation, and all of it's going to be gone, and you will have nothing. That seems like it is despairing, even if it's like, oh, you can still enjoy putting money into there for its own reasons.
It's also, I think this reaction to this no meaning really reminds me. I'm gonna jump to another TV show reference, Angel. Angel's about a vampire with a soul, but basically there's an episode where he kind of comes to this realization that life is meaningless. Joss Whedon, who writes the show, is an atheist, by the way, where he comes to realize life is meaningless and everything, and then he just starts despairing and everything. But then he snaps out of it and then gives this weird remark where he says, like, well, if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do. It doesn't really make much sense to me, but I think it's this sort of attitude where it's like, yeah, it's meaningless, but I'm going to go on anyway. And
you can just choose to, you can act arbitrarily. There's nothing wrong with that.
It's also like even in the ending of the show here, he basically goes up against the Wolfram and Hart, the big demons and all this guys. They know they're probably going to die at the end. Like, it's not going to ultimately amount to much, but it's like, well, we're still going to, stop them, even if it's just for a minute. And the show ends with this big, like, it's just these four guys in an alleyway, and then they got these big armies marching, the dragons and everything, and they're like, how long do you think? It's like, it's like, we're not going to last very long here. And just as they're about, but like, we're going to fight, we're going to go down fighting, even though it's not going to amount to anything. And then just as they're about to start fighting, the show ends. That was the way, and that wasn't like, yeah.
Now, the question is, if the objection is legitimate, that the idea that everything is going to be obliterated in the heat death of the universe, to say that doesn't make a difference, that is itself open to all sorts of counterexamples. Like at the end of that show when they're fighting the hopeless battle.
Angel,
yeah. Is that different? Is there fighting less or more, less meaningful than if they actually had a chance of winning, if they could have
Yeah.
actually won. It seems like if they could have won,
Yeah.
there's a much bigger reason to fight the battle. There's a lot more meaning there than if it's just a hopeless battle that you can go down in dignity. As the ship goes down, you can play the violin and sort of like dress yourself up as you die. Versus if you could actually save people's lives or keep the ship from
Or at
going
least have
down
a
in the
chance.
first place. There definitely seems to be a difference. Let me close this
Yeah.
blind thing. 'Cause
The
it's-
light's coming up. He's got
Oh,
the
it's
blind.
totally coming in.
Yeah, but like, yeah, it does seem because
Oh no, it's so completely.
I mean, what?
It's so completely dark that it's like I get a tiny bit of.
We have lighting problems here apparently.
Yeah, we'll need to get an
Now
extra light.
let's talk about this point here he mentioned where where he tries to say God doesn't fix despair for believers, and I believe that's where he gave the example of like saying somebody like I think Noah says like I know some people that would say that it is horrifying to be conscious for trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of years. Like they find that idea horrifying and everything. And then of course he says, now you, Dr. Craig, may not think that though, but the fact that some people might think that shows how this whole thing is, I guess it goes back to his emotional and psychological aspect of this. Though, first of all, as I was saying to Drew, I find that kind of odd that, I mean, if you're, how can it be, how can eternal bliss be terrifying exactly? Because isn't the definition of bliss, because if you're terrified, then you're not really in bliss for eternity. So how can the idea of eternal bliss be despairing? Like, I'm not seeing that.
It just seems more like it's like you've never had the experience, and therefore you think you're in a position to judge it. Like the young children who think, oh, kissing, that's just horrible and gross and terrible. Then you're an adult, and your balls drop, and you're like, you're like, oh yes, I now know what that's all about.
Like C.S. Lewis's story with the kid sucking the lollipop.
Yeah.
And people are singing ships. Yeah, I was talking about the violin thing. Although, as I recall, wasn't it Craig that used the example of if life is meaningless, it's like stacking deck chairs on the Titanic?
Yeah.
Like, he used that example too. Like, what's the point if the ship's going to go down?
Yeah, there's a difference between stacking or like polishing the silverware on the Titanic versus polishing, let's say, the silverware before some major some major like international negotiations. Silverware that is going to be used and is going to be throughout time is going to be maybe sold off later on.
And
polishing that silverware may make a difference, whereas on the Titanic, when it's never going to be used anyway, there is a difference between one and the other. So it's like
I think it might also be, psychologically speaking, I think the amount of time is probably what gets to people here, because I think the idea that the heat death of the universe is like millions of years away, that I think that might not resonate with some people here. Because obviously, like, the deck chairs example, like if you're doing something that, once you finish this task, maybe like 5 seconds, say, it's going to be destroyed. Like, I think then pretty much everybody would agree, well, then it doesn't matter what you do then. But then, you extend the time to, say, a few million years, then suddenly it seems meaningful. It's like there seems to be this sort of time. Am I making sense here?
It turns something that's like meaningless into something that's meaningful. Oh, okay. Just by extending the time.
Yeah, like extending the amount of time. I think that might be part where this.
By adding a finite amount of time as opposed to an infinite amount of time, which might, I don't know if that would it give it meaning, or it would. It would supply maybe a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. I think that was Dr. Craig's point.
And let's talk about the quote, the Bertrand Russell quote, part where he was talking about, where because there's a quote Dr. Craig gives from Bertrand Russell where he talks about I forget.
The despair is not this wall, but it's this gate towards something that's better.
Yeah. Noah points out how if you read the whole quote where Bertrand Russell talks about looking at unyielding despair, Bertrand Russell is actually saying that despair is like I said, it's like a gate. It's something you go through only to, I guess, see the light at the other end or something.
Yeah, you go through.
I feel terrible. I should have. I apologize.
Yeah,
I should have written the whole quote down. I apologize.
Yeah, he thought that Dr. Craig quoted him out of context, and again, I don't know the context. Noah provided some of the context. I'm not sure about the exact context of the quote, so I know there's a lot of nihilistic philosophers though who think that it's like, yeah, it's just life is horrible and meaningless and it sucks. Oh, let's have dinner tonight.
Well, have a nice chaps here.
Have a nice day.
Maybe I will do the video where I go more thoroughly into this though. But
yeah, you can do a full response video that's like
Yeah.
carefully laid out and not a casual conversation like this. I mean, my whole thing that I've actually tried talking to Noah in private messages. Like, well, he is open to the idea of objective meaning, and that's good. That's a very good thing.
Well, I'm sure this will stimulate a conversation in the
Yeah.
in the comments
You
of
see-
the Google Hangout.
Yeah, you see, my whole contention is that whole trilemma of meaning or significance. Is it objective? And I don't think it can be on naturalism. You see with God or with theism, you at least have some bridge to connect your fact and value distinctions, so your is and oughts, or your just states of affairs and like objective value. If you have this perfect being, God, where is and ought are absolutely identical, this perfect being, you at least have some object, a concrete object, where these values exist. These objective values, meanings, purpose, significance exists. If you don't have him, it becomes very difficult. Unless you want to, let's say, do the second one, which is reduce it. You want it to be reductionist. So we'll take value or meaning, and we'll say, well, it's significance. What is significance? Well, let's say that's like causal impact, right? If my wife came down with cancer, it would be meaningful to me, or it would be meaningful. I suppose it would be in an objective or reductionist sense, in that it would have causal impact on my behaviors, or greater causal impact on my behaviors than if, let's say, the walls in some building were painted a slightly darker color. Like there's maybe it's more meaningful in the sense that it has greater causal impact. I'm not sure if you could hold to that. It seems like that would be vulnerable to counterexamples.
The idea
that meaning is equal to, say, let's say, causal potency.
So
an example would be that something that's not meaningful. Meaningful might be like, for example, the Higgs boson particle. I mean, in an objective sense, I mean that would be the most causally impactful things in all of existence. It would underlie all of reality. But when we talk about things that are meaningful to us, we usually don't talk about it as like, oh, that the electron has a certain charge, so that's so meaningful to me. But even though that actually is from a causal standpoint, so the causal difference is huge. Another thing is, if you read John Searle's writings against computational theories of the mind, he noted that meaning, or that the meaning of, let's say, a text, or of like what it means for or computation itself, is not intrinsic to physics. If you had multiple computers, one running through water gateways, one running through electronics, and one running through, let's say, light switches, there's nothing in physics that would tell you that the three programs are equivalent. Or if I had, let's say, an MP3 of some talk, and I had a transcript, again, there's nothing in the physical world, nothing in physics to tell you that the two are equivalent to each other. So it really seems to break down our ability to think of, like, how do we reduce this? Like, if you are going to reduce it, you need to come up with an account that isn't vulnerable to counterexamples. I really don't think that's the case. So the third one, which I think Noah's view, is that it is meaningful in a subjective sense.
Yeah. And that's why I'm kind of scratching my head, because I mean, if you say that value is subjective, or well, it's meaningful to me, that doesn't really seem to refute the whole idea that we're getting at here, that without God there's no objective meaning.
Yeah, it's like,
so,
what do we mean by saying something is meaningful to me anyway? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just think it like. I know what he's saying. I mean, it's like, like meaningful to me, like the idea that it has significance to me here. I mean, kind of like, I guess what he means is kind of like say there's maybe there's a TV show that I like it's significant to me, but maybe you say you are not a fan of this show.
Okay.
It's like, you don't care, but but it's meaningful to me. Like, I really like this. It has value for me. I think that's what Noah might be getting at when he's saying that value is subjective.
So it means as long as
it's not objectively true that the show is
as long as we have subjective value, that's okay. The universe isn't really meaningless.
Yeah.
We can still have this sort of, we don't have to despair, and life is no longer absurd because why? Because I experience certain emotions.
I think that might be. I'm sure Noah will clarify this for us, but that seems to be a lot what he's getting at here.
So I react emotionally towards certain things, and that gives life meaningful. That seems it just seems like some sort of category error.
Yeah, I mean,
you're reducing like the universe being, or not the universe, sorry, you're reducing things being meaningful. Really, just to saying that I experience certain emotions towards certain things. It just seems sort of arbitrary, especially since your emotional state can be totally messed with by drugs. I have plenty of experience with not from not really doing drugs like in college. I didn't do very much, but from being medicated, diagnosed with ADHD at the age of like I think like 6, and having all these weird chemical lobotomy type drugs. So you can your emotional states and what feels meaningful or not definitely changes based on your blood chemistry.
Oh.
I remember one drug I was like taking. I think it was like some sort of like experimental ADHD medicine, and it put me in this horrible state of just like drawing at the drop of a hat. I don't know if anyone else has like gone through Metroid and just started breaking down and crying while like going through one of the levels in the original Nintendo's Metroid. It's like,
Wow.
yeah, I didn't realize it was that emotional of a game, Drew.
Well, I thought
drugs.
I thought Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time was pretty emotional at the ending. But
Yeah.
okay.
Well, to me,
Yeah.
Metroid was more meaningful because I was on certain drugs when I was doing it.
Interesting. But I know this video's running long here, but have we talked enough about? Because I think we've kind of covered enough about the problem atheism seems to have with value and meaning. But let's kind of because he did, and it's a challenge that should be answered. Kind of reflect it back, like how does God solve the problem of meaning, and is life purposeful or not here? Like, because Noah was kind of indicating that God doesn't exactly seem to solve the problem. That's when we talked about some examples I think he gave. I know we've already talked about the Stalin Saint one, but is there anything we can add to that, you think?
It's the idea of like
of how does God provide meaning for
we
life?
we actually have some standards in which that just like the what was called the meter rod, which it's not just that the rod was a meter long in France. I mean, the rod at one point was the meter, right? The objective thing upon which everything else is measured against. Like we have some object which is the concrete standard. For otherwise, I mean, what else would be your standard? Like some sort of platonic universe? I mean, that would have a huge like problem regarding whether we could know these like let's say if it's abstract.
I mean, like if
objects.
meaning was just in a Platonistic sort of
Yeah,
thing.
some sort of Platonistic heaven. We would have no way of connecting like our experience in reality with it. There's nothing that would connect the two unless you have God, in which that reintroduces the same problem that you're trying to avoid.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I guess I think we've talked a lot about this here. Yeah, this has been a long video. So yeah, in closing, yeah, Noah, I know you're watching this here. I hope we've said at least some. I hope we've at least said what we've said is at least adequately satisfying here. Though I'm certainly looking forward to talking more about this in the comments and whatnot, though. So
yeah. So I guess if I was going to do a response, which I'm not, but if I was, I would respond to his idea of value being human generated. If we talk about value in an objective sense, well, no, I mean I don't think there's any way you could have objective value on this sort of atheistic universe. If it's reducible to some physical state of affairs, that's open to counterexamples. And if it's subjective, then that's not even what Dr. Peck's talking about in the first place. I mean, that's not what I mean, that's like calling every nihilist philosopher a complete idiot for saying it's like, oh, but we have these like they don't know that we have these subjective things in life. So it's just a category, and it's just off topic. It's a category error, and it's just off topic.
Okay, well, all right, yeah. So take care, everybody.
Okay, cool. Later.